I want to tell you about a place that I kind of grew up. In many ways, I grew up in the mountains around Tellico Plains in the Cherokee National Forest. This is not where we lived, but we had kind of a second home there. It was a small, broken down fishing cabin, really, that my grandfather had and then my family had. And we kind of, I grew up going there. It was my happy place. And so much, it was a land full of possibilities for me as a child. Endless possibilities. I grew up there and there was so much fun. It was a place where I learned and loved trout fishing. I remember being, standing in the middle of a stream, casting a line, and I think I forgot everything I knew about trout fishing because I haven't been fishing since I've had kids of my own and whatnot. But maybe one day, some of you are retired. Maybe in retirement I might pick it up again, or maybe when you get to retirement you don't remember the things that you used to do and you find new things to do. I don't know. But I also, when I learned to drive, there was nothing that I loved more than getting in my pickup truck and driving the Forest Service roads around that area. And I've got a 14-year-old who I'm thinking about in a couple years he's going to start driving, and it scares me to death to think that I was the kid who was driving those Forest Service roads. And one of my favorite places to go was this bald up on top of the mountain called Whig Meadow, and it's really high up and you can see forever, really. And the way to get there is pretty risky. And in fact, one time I was coming home and I was by myself and I was driving back. I rolled my pickup truck on the way down. Like, it was really fun. And I was like, I'm going to hit that. There's a bank coming and I can't stop. I'm going to hit it. And I hit it. And I was up on top of the truck was upside down before I knew it. And I think that was the last time that I made that trip for many years. But then as an adult and in the past couple years, I've been wanting to go back to this place. It was a place that Hope and I went when we dated. It was a place that some buddies of mine, we went and slept outside with the tent. The tent was the night sky one night, and like, this was a place I loved, and I wanted to go back and wanted to show my own kids. And I remembered the way to get there is you had to drive up this one road. It's called North River Road, if you're familiar with the area at all. And North River Road is like a one-lane road, sometimes 1.5 lane road, and it's kind of gravel-ish, okay? And so you got to drive up this road, and then you have to turn off on another road. And so I remember that being a quick trip. It was like 10 minutes off this other road, off that main road, and you could get to Whig Meadow. So a few months ago, myself and then my oldest and one of his buddies, we were up there, and I was like, you know what, let's go check this place out. We didn't have the little kids, so I didn't have to worry about it. So we got in the truck. We started driving up the mountain, that one-lane gravel-ish road. And then we turned off onto the road that I knew we had to go on to get to Whig Meadow. And if the other road was like 1 to 1.5 lanes, this turnoff road was no more than a lane, and any like pass-bys or like turnoffs were just perched on the side of the mountain with nothing beside you. So it's like really, really up there. And if the other road was gravel-ish, this road had given away its gravel many, many years ago, and there was nothing but ruts and rocks. And this 10-minute drive was fine, and then 15 minutes passed, and then 20 minutes passed, and then a half hour, and then 40 minutes later, I'm stuck wondering, did I forget where to go? Like, this is not right. And about 45 minutes into this trip, I'm thinking, I'm going to have to figure out how to turn this pickup truck around. I'm thankful that I had four-wheel drive because the road was pretty rough. But I knew that I was going to have to figure out how to turn this truck around. But somehow, just as I was second-guessing myself, or probably like 10th guessing myself by this point, we found where we were supposed to be going. There were some other people there, and I was so glad to get there. What ended up being a 10-minute detour just ended up taking much, much longer. And in the midst of that, I was asking myself, did I make a mistake? Did I make a mistake? Or was this the right path? And it's funny now to think about this, but it also reminds me that in life, it's easy to think that you might be on the right road until you realize that you're way off course. In life, sometimes it's easy to think that you might be going in the right direction, heading and doing the right things, but then it takes maybe months or years later and you realize everything has been off course. In life, it can be easy to get off track with what matters most. You know, it's sometimes life just keeps going faster and faster, and you think you're headed in the right direction, or maybe you think you're headed at least somewhere good, maybe not the right direction, but somewhere good. But then along the way, you've made a wrong turn, and you end up on a path that might look okay from the outside, but deep down, you're anxious, you're angry, you're chasing something you just can't quite reach. You know, it's easy to get lost in life. You can get lost in work and a career, thinking that success will finally make you feel secure. You can get lost in your opinions, becoming obsessed with being right and making sure everyone else knows they're wrong, and lose sight of what's loving in the midst of it. We can get lost in political outrage, in nonstop news and fear that everything is falling apart. You can get lost in things that seem harmless on the outside, you know, like sports or kids' schedules or keeping up with appearances, but you can still get lost in these things. And the thing about this is that most of the time, in the middle of whatever is going on, you don't know that you're really lost. You don't know that you're lost. There aren't these giant red flags that say you're lost. There's not a flashing sign that says right way, you know, you need to make a U-turn. In the moment, it's hard to tell if you're on the correct path or not. Often life is kind of like that detour I made to get to Whig Meadow. You think you might be on the right path, but you're not really sure. On my trip, I mean, what I would have given for one sign, just one little measly sign that said Whig Meadow this way, so many miles. And I'd be like, okay, at least I would know that I was on the right path. It's kind of like that, too, when you're hiking. If you've ever been hiking, you know that it's important to look out for trail markers and trailblazers to try to see where you're going and make sure you're headed in the right direction. And these are markers that others have left, others have put on the trail and saying, I've been here before, and this is the way that you can go, and you can enjoy this place, and you can make it out as on the right path. People have gone before you and marked the path to help you stay on the path. And sometimes these trail markers or even road signs, they can be easy to miss because you have to know what to look for. You have to be on the lookout for these trail markers, but they're there. The good news is that even in life, even though it can be hard to tell if you're on the right path in life, that Jesus knew that you and I would need help. Jesus knew that you and I would need help when it comes to figuring out the path that you're on in life. And even though life doesn't necessarily come with road signs or trailblazers, Jesus teaches a way where you can check for the trail markers in your life. This week we are continuing our message series called Jesus Said What? And we are in the middle of a third week of looking at Jesus' Sermon on the Mount. And this Sermon on the Mount is perhaps the most famous sermon that anyone has ever preached, and it basically contains Jesus' vision for life, for what it looks like when God's reign is brought to earth. It shares Jesus' vision of what life can look like when God's dream for humanity becomes real. And Jesus teaches us in this sermon how he wants his followers to live and really how humanity can best thrive and best live together. It's not just about rules. It's about a whole different way of life, a life that is built on things like trust and love and humility and justice. And Jesus spends most of his sermon talking about this. He spends most of the time talking about what this new life can look like. Then towards the end of the sermon, he lets his listeners know that they have a choice to make. He lets his listeners know that there are basically two ways of living. One is that they can live in line with the way of Jesus, or they can live in line with the way of the world. And here's what Jesus says. If you want to follow along in your own Bible, this comes from the book of Matthew, chapter 7. And Matthew is the first book in the New Testament, and it's where we've been reading about these words of Jesus from this sermon. And so Matthew chapter 7, verse 13 says this: "Go in through the narrow gate. The gate that leads to destruction is broad and wide. So many people enter through it. But the gate that leads to life is narrow, and the road is difficult, so few people will find it. So here, Jesus is talking about life and how there are two gates and two paths really in life, two roads, if you will. One path is wide and it looks nice and easy. It's the interstate highway system of life where everybody gets to go, where everybody wants to be. It's full of good things, but in the end, this path leads to destruction, Jesus tells us. On the other hand, there is a narrow gate and a road that can be difficult and bumpy with ruts in the middle of it. It's a difficult road and it's a narrow gate, but Jesus tells us that this is the gate and this is the road that leads to life. And we know that if you've lived for any period of time, we know that life is full of both difficult things and easy things. And regardless of where you are in life, sometimes things are difficult in your life and sometimes things are easy. And because life is full of a mix of difficult things and a mix of easy things, it can sometimes be difficult to know if you're on the right path or not. In the midst of it, it's hard to discern, is this the easy path or is this the hard path? It's like my trip through the forest. The road was rough and I didn't know if I was headed in the right direction. It can be like this in life too. You can be going, you might be going down a path in your career. You might be going down a path of supporting what you think is right. You might be going down the path of retirement. You might be going down any other path in life, but how are you supposed to know if you're on that right path? I mean, Jesus tells us that the path itself can be deceiving, with the narrow one being difficult and the wide one being easy. The way the path looks or the ease at which you go cannot always be a reliable indicator if you're on the right path, because at the end of the day, you don't always know which path you're on. And think about someone who's starting out in life. They get married, they find a successful career. This is like the American dream scenario that people think about. Then they, in the midst of this, they have to make some sacrifices, but it looks like they might be on the right path and they're accumulating things and they've got friends and things are going well, but then the stress starts eating at them. The financial pressure starts eating at the marriage. Long hours at the office, at the work start calling. And maybe one of the partners starts to confide in someone new. And maybe in the midst of this confiding in someone new, and an affair kindles, something happens. And the path that began with so much promise and looked like it was taking all the right steps, it ends up in a hurtful place. So how are you to know? How are you supposed to know if you're on the right path? Well, Jesus knows this is hard. Jesus knows this is hard, so he tells you that you will see markers along the way. He tells you that if you have the eyes to see, if that you look out, you will see trail markers and signs along the way. And the thing about trail markers and road signs is that you kind of have to be out on the lookout for them, or you're liable to miss them. And in what Jesus says next in Matthew, he tells us about these trail markers. So in Matthew chapter 7, verse 16, Jesus says this: "You will know them by their fruit. Do people get bunches of grapes from thorny weeds, or do they get figs from thistles? In the same way, every good tree produces good fruit, and every rotten tree produces bad fruit. A good tree can't produce bad fruit, and a rotten tree can't produce good fruit. Every tree that doesn't produce good fruit is chopped down and thrown into the fire. Therefore," he says, "you will know them by their fruit." You will know them by their fruit. How do you know which path you're on? How do you know which path you're on? What do these trail markers look like? Well, Jesus says that a bad tree produces bad fruit, and a good tree can produce good fruit. And if someone is on the right path, their life will bear good fruit. And this good fruit that is born out of your life is the trail marker, is the sign that is showing you and demonstrating to yourself and to others that you are on the right path. The inverse is also true. Perhaps if you aren't bearing good fruit, or your fruit is rotten, that maybe it's a trail marker that you've gotten off the right path. You've gotten onto the wrong path. And if that's the case, maybe it's time for you to begin to think about finding a new way. This idea that there are trail markers in life is well attested to by people that have gone before you and I in the faith. I'm so glad that I'm not the first Christian, the first follower of Jesus to have lived, because there's people that have gone before us that have try to help you figure things out. And one of these guys, I think about our own tradition. We're here at Kern Church, we're part of the Methodist tradition. And the founder of the Methodist movement was this guy named John Wesley. And he was someone who believed that if you were on the right path, there would be evidence. In fact, Wesley preached a whole sermon about this called The Marks of the New Birth. And in this sermon, he shared what signs of being on the right path look like. The good fruit, perhaps, of which Jesus spoke. And simply put, to kind of take all these big ideas, simply put, Wesley said that this fruit, these marks of what it means to live the right path, can be named as faith, hope, and love. And he called love the greatest of these. And then he went on to say that there is only one mark that is necessary to show that you are on the right path. He said the necessary fruit of this love of God is the love of our neighbor. So the necessary fruit, the fruit that you are going to show, the fruit that is necessary to show that you are on the right way, is the love that you have for other people, of every soul which God has made, a love whereby we love every man or woman as ourselves, as we love our own souls. So if one is walking the right path, there will be signs. There will be signs. And one of the clearest signs is that you will live love towards other people, that you will live a life of love towards every single person that God has made. So if the fruit of the trail, if fruit is kind of the trail marker, and if love, real lived out love is what shows that you are on the right path, what does it look like in real life? What does it actually look like to walk this narrow path that leads to life? Thankfully, Jesus doesn't leave us guessing. He really doesn't. Jesus gives us concrete and really specific things here in his sermon. He doesn't leave us guessing. In fact, pretty much the whole Sermon on the Mount is a discussion about what it means to walk the narrow path, of what it means to walk this right path that leads to life. Pretty much the whole Sermon on the Mount is Jesus just trying to show people how to live the fruit of the narrow path, of Jesus versus the destruction of the wide path of the world. And so what I want to do is I want to give you just a few snapshots and some point these out to you, to point out what Jesus says are the marks of this life. These perhaps can function for you as some trail markers to help you kind of evaluate the path you are on in life, to help you determine, am I walking the way of the world, or am I walking the way of Jesus? And when you see these marks that Jesus gives, it can help you know that you are indeed on the right path, that you are indeed on Jesus' path. And some of these, if you've been with us for the past few weeks, we've looked at these over the past few weeks through the Sermon on the Mount, and some of these are new today. And to help you on this, each of you have an insert, a bookmark, so to speak, in your worship program to kind of serve as an easy reference for these trail markers to help you reflect. So let's look at them. The first snapshot I want to give you is that the world says things like get more, secure your future, you'll never have enough. But Jesus says in Matthew 6, give freely, live generously, don't worry, your Father knows what you need. Another one is that the world says judge first, assume the worst, cancel the ones who don't agree with you. But Jesus says in Matthew 7, love deeply, treat others the way you want to be treated, even when it's hard. Another one is that the world says, fix it yourself, push through, don't show your weakness. That can be a hard one. And in Matthew 7, Jesus says, ask, seek, knock. You are not alone. Your Father, God, is listening. The world says, get even, make them pay, don't let them get away with it. And Jesus says in Matthew 5, forgive, turn the other cheek, love your enemies. The world says, look good, perform, keep the image polished. But Jesus says, live sincerely, live authentically. Don't do it for show, but do it from the heart. The world says, panic, fear the future, control everything. But Jesus says in Matthew 6, look at the birds. Trust your Father and seek the kingdom first. Friends, these are the trail markers. These are the fruit. When these show up in your life, not necessarily perfectly, but genuinely, when they genuinely show up in your life, that's the fruit that Jesus is talking about. That's the sign that you are walking the path that leads to life. And so today I want to invite you to check your trail markers, to check your fruit. What kind of fruit is growing in your life? And even if you realize in the midst of this that you're off course, and sometimes we all get off course. Even if you realize that you're off course in the midst of this, I want you to know that it's not too late. It's not too late, but sometimes you're going to need some help. Andrew Devers told a story about being lost in the woods in Backpacker magazine. And in 2021, Andrew went out for a solo day hike in a national forest in Washington State. And what started as a simple trail, it turned into a nightmare. He ran out of the marked trails and he ended up on this overgrown path. And before he knew it, he was trying to turn around. And when he turned around, the markers were all gone. The landscape had changed and there was no cell service. And in fact, he got turned around and he was lost for 9 days. He'd gone out on a day hike, so he wasn't prepared for 9 days. He was lost for 9 days. He was completely lost. In the midst of this, he battled physical pain and hunger and despair. In the midst of this, his thoughts turned self-critical. And he remembers speaking to himself, you know, if you were anyone else, you would have found your way out by now. Have you ever said that to yourself? You know, if you were anyone else, you'd have this figured out by now. But your stupid self found yourself stuck in the middle of the woods with no way out. But he couldn't find one trail marker and he knew he was going to die. But he kept walking. And as he kept walking, one day, after 9 days of struggling along, he came across some acorns. Now, these acorns to you and I, they don't really mean anything, but to Andrew, these acorns, he remembered them of lining the trail that he had started out on. Somehow, in the midst of these 9 days, he found himself back to kind of where he started after 9 days of struggling alone, after 9 days of coming to the reality that he was going to die at this place. He found these acorns. And soon after this, 2 hikers spotted him. And they were able to call for rescue. He shares a story of how even as these 2 hikers found him and then they left to go call for rescue, he thought it was just like a hallucination, like they really weren't there. That's how desperate he was. And when he made it out, Andrew realized that even though he was lost, he was never alone. Because there were people that were looking for him this whole time. His best friend had been looking for him. His girlfriend had been looking for him. There were people who cared about him, who had been looking for him this whole time. He said, I had all these people who were worried about me, who looked for me, and they rescued me. Now, maybe you feel like that today, that you've wandered off, that you're not sure which path you're on today, but maybe you've gone too far and you're trying to find your way back to that path. Maybe you've heard the same thing that Andrew heard in his voice. You know, if you were anybody else, you would have this figured out by now. What I want you to hear, I want you to hear this, that Jesus doesn't just give you trail markers. Jesus doesn't just give you signs and say you got to figure it out. Jesus is the rescuer that comes looking for you. Jesus is the rescuer that comes looking for you wherever you are, however you are lost. And when you've been lost long enough, when you're tired, when you're scraped up, when you're ready to give up, Jesus is not just standing at the trailhead waiting for you to find the way back. Jesus is already in the woods. Jesus is already calling your name. Jesus is already bringing rescue to wherever you are. So as we get ready to close today, I want to invite you to take a step. Just take a step of reflection And maybe your step is just realizing that you need Jesus today, and you've been on that wrong path and you're not sure which way it is to go next, but Jesus is there offering to rescue. Or maybe you've been following the narrow path and you're like, I'm weary of walking this path because sometimes it feels like I'm alone. And if you're walking this path and you're weary, maybe you want to know, where is there fruit? Is fruit actually evident in my life? Does Jesus actually have a trail marker for me? And maybe you've drifted or need to return. Maybe you need rescue. Wherever you are in this, if that's you, I just want to invite you to reach out to Jesus, because he's here. He's ready to help. If you need rescue, he's ready for rescue. Wherever you are, Jesus meets you on the trail. So friends, which path are you on? Which path are you on? Where is Jesus inviting you to step next? Right now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to pray for you. And if you're someone who just really needs rescue in life, I want you to know that this rail is open, this kneeling rail is open to just come and to pray, to ask God to rescue you. And if you need more help in that and you want somebody to pray with you, just raise your hand a little bit. I'll come pray with you and just pray that Jesus will surround you. Or if you're here today and you're just reflecting, you're like, I'm not completely lost, but I need to know things. I just want to invite you to take this path, these markers with you. Use it in your time of reflection this week to just consider, am I walking the way of Jesus? Am I walking on this right path? And maybe God is inviting you to take a step back towards him as well. So let's pray. God, in the midst of the world, in the midst of life, it can be difficult to know which path that we're on. There's some who are here who have been walking your path for many years, and maybe in the midst of it today, though, they confess that they're a little weary. But they're not sure if you're still there or if they're still on that right path. And if there's somebody here that's struggling in that way, God, I pray that you would speak to them, speak a word of assurance in their lives so that they can know that you were there, you were with them. And God, if there's somebody here this morning that it's just like, I'm completely lost. I don't even know how I got here today. If there's somebody here who's struggling in that way, oh God, I pray that they would just cry out to you. Say, save me. I believe in your power, in your grace, that you were there to rescue. So wherever each one is, oh God, I pray that you would help us all take a step towards you, a step towards your path, a step towards your grace. Amen.